Okay. So second order of business. Did we complete the lecture last week? Do you guys remember? Do you know if I had to say we'll come back to that next week? Because I honestly, I don't remember. Yes, no, you don't remember either. Cecilia, you're saying yeah?
We did.
Yeah, we finished? We finished it?
Yeah, we finished. We got through every group.
Okay, cool. All right, so we don't have to jump into that. So what we'll do then for the remainder of the time that we have for the next hour is we're just gonna engage the reading. So in that regard, we'll start off with our fishbowl. So I'll choose 3 names at random to fishbowl. Again, you have 1 time to pass. If you passed already, which is Sasha, I know you passed last time. So if you're called on again, you cannot pass. But if you have not passed, you have one time to say, you know what, I'm not ready. I'll pick up again next time. So Douglas, how do you feel about fishbowling?
For today,
Yes,
I think I'll pass for today.
Okay. So there's no next time that you have to fishbowl if you're called on. Carissa, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I'll say I'll pass this time.
Okay. And then also, if I called you last week and you went, let me know that, I can't.
I went last week.
Who was that? Who said that? I'm sorry.
Douglas.
Oh, okay.
I went last week.
Bro. Don't worry about
I went last week.
Okay, so I'll erase that. So Carissa. Precious, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I think I'm ready.
Okay. And remember, there's no really wrong way to do it. It's just kind of speaking on what you thought was important throughout the reading. Miracle, how do you feel about fishbowling?
Can I pass?
Yes. Okay. How about Jocelyn? How do you feel about fishbowling?
Can I pass?
Yep. Valeria, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I'll do it.
Okay. So yeah, Valeria. Who is this? Mariana, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I think I'll pass.
Okay. Is it Montserrat Pena? How do you feel about fishbowling?
I think I'll pass this time.
All right, got you on pass. Cecilia, how do you feel about fishbowling?
I think I'm ready.
Okay. Thank you. And you're good for the rest of the semester, Cecilia, so you're done.
Can I unpass mine?
Yeah, okay, I'll pick you up. So we have Cecilia, we have Miracle, and we have Precious. Is there anybody that wants to volunteer for the fishbowl?
I'll go.
Who said that? I'm sorry. Okay, Cecilia. So no, we have you already. So as of now, our 3 is Precious, Valeria, and Cecilia. Is there anyone else additional that wants to volunteer? All right. So again, I could pose you guys questions to discuss, or you guys could discuss whatever is important to you in the article. Do me a favor though, if you could mention the page number, that way I could pull up the page number, I could read along, and that way everyone else in the class can join in as well. So again, the 3 who've been chosen, they're tasked to start off the conversation, but once that conversation is complete between the 3 of them, you guys are supposed to open this up to a broader conversation with the rest of the class, okay? So do you guys want me to pose questions for you, or you just want to kind of speak to what you thought was important?
I feel comfortable just speaking off of what I felt was important.
Okay. All right, it's on you.
All right. So I think this was the second page that we had. And so it's kind of like the list of like different things. And in the reading, isn't like Mott similar to like God? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it kind of, Cecilia.
Kind of?
It's more of an ideal or principle. She has been characterized as a goddess. So if anything, it would be more of a goddess than a god, because it's a feminine principle.
Okay, good to know. So what I found significant was just kind of those lists of, I shall not kill another man. It was just like a different type of list of what you should follow. And it kind of made me relate to the 10 Commandments because I'm Catholic, and that was one of the first things that I had to learn.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought it was really interesting because, well, first I also thought Mott was like similar to a god, but then reading the long list, which is, I'm currently looking at it right now, 36, I think. Yeah, 36. It also reminded me of the commandments because I'm Christian. So I thought it was pretty interesting to read that. But I also think that I was also a little bit confused during some of the parts of the reading. During like I don't know what page this is, the part 3 of the PDF during the introduction.
When I was talking about the oncology, yeah, I felt a little confused on that too.
Yeah, that was confusing.
And the moral like metaphysics and stuff like that. But besides that, I thought it was pretty interesting to read.
I
What
also
we'll
made
do, I'm sorry, not to cut you guys off, just real quick,
sorry.
in regards to the ontology chapter, we'll spend some time trying to clarify that for you guys today, okay? So that any questions you have, keep those in the back of your mind. We'll spend a good portion of time kind of clarifying that. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
I also made the comparison between the list and the 10 Commandments. I don't know, like it just made sense, or like maybe the sins, because it said thou shalt not kill, so it made sense, if that makes sense.
Precious just went. So at this point, we've heard from all 3 of our fish bowlers. Let's open it up to a broader class conversation. What else did you guys, anyone else outside of the 3 who fish bowl, what did you guys think about the reading? Was it confusing? Was it easy to understand? Did you feel that the argument that Karanga was trying to make was effective? Anything, what did you guys think? And again, you could utilize your journals as resources to help you guys chime in conversation at this point. So somebody tell me what they think is the thesis of our readings for last week. So what is the argument? What are they trying to get you to understand?
I feel like they're trying to get us to understand like the morals in the text, which is the main reason and focus. Like you're taking your interpretation on each text.
Absolutely. So the book, and you guys wouldn't know this, but the book is called Ma'at, The Moral Ideal in Ancient Egypt, right? So Helena hit it right on the head. It's trying to give us an insight into the morals of what ancient Kemet was, right? What was the moral guidepost of that society? You guys didn't have to read this, but I'm gonna read to you the opening paragraph of the opening chapter of this book, right? This is the introduction. And it's gonna give you an idea of what Karanga was up to. The essential thrust and purpose of this work is to delineate and critically examine Ma'at, the moral ideal of ancient Egypt or Kemet, right? Using the declarations of innocence in the New Kingdom text, the book coming forth by day, and other key ethical texts as the fundamental foci, and that just means focus, right? As the fundamental foci for analysis. And in the process, explore the usefulness of Ma'atan ethical thought as a resource for modern moral discourse and philosophic reflection on critical moral issues. So this is what the author is up to with that book, right? So we're going to use this concept of Ma'at as what we recognize as the ideal moral principles for ancient Kemet, right? And we're going to use books like the Declarations of Innocence, which were the 42 confessions that I believe Precious was mentioning. We're also going to use the book Coming Forth by Day to help support our argument, and other key ethical texts as fundamental foci or focus for analysis, right? So we're going to use these other texts to support our arguments or our claims that we'll be making, right? and in the process, explore the usefulness of Ma'atan ethical thought as a resource for modern moral discourse. So essentially, this idea or this concept of Ma'at, we're going to try to bring this into the modern, into today's society, and see if it's applicable. And see if this is something that we can use in the now as a moral guidepost, right? So this is what Karenga is up to. So a lot of you mentioned the 10 Commandments, right? I'm going to first explain to you how, in practice, this idea and this notion of Ma'at is actualized in the Kemetic theology. So when anytime someone transitions or they, what we would call die, right? They have to go before the goddess Ma'at and state the 42 confessions. So notice, was it page 144, I believe? We have our 42 confessions. So I want to draw a distinction, though, between these confessions and the commandments, right? So somebody mentioned to me, like, how does the 10 Commandments sound? What is the terminology and the phrasing of the 10 Commandments? Somebody, like, read one off for me. Or just speak on a 10 Commandment.
I think I have one here in the writing that I put. Honor your father and mother. You
Right.
shall not steal.
Right. Honor your father and thy mother so your days could be long on earth. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not, etc., 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 right? So it's a command. We're telling you what to do or what not to do, right? Now, what's the difference in these confessions? How are they phrased? What's the terminology in the confession, right? It's, I have not, confession number 8, I have not deprived the orphan of his poverty. I have not done what the divine one hates. I have not slandered a servant to his superior, right? So it's stating what I have not done, right? So it's not more so about telling you what to do, but it's a checking of the way that you lived your life, right? So you're saying, these are the things that I've done, these are things that I have not done. So this is kind of saying, am I aligned with the moral code of the Kemetic society? So how this would play out in the practical sense in the terms of its theology, right? When someone made their transition and they're going to become an ancestor, or when they died and they're going to journey into the afterlife, they were brought before Ma'at. Ma'at would hold their heart, and Ma'at would hold a feather. As they stated the 42 confessions of Ma'at, I have not done wrong to people. I have not impoverished my family or friends. As they stated these confessions, their heart would be weighed. So if they say these things truthfully, then the heart would be lighter than the feather, right? If they say these things untruthfully, then the heart would be heavier than the feather, because you're saying these things not from a space of truth, right? And if you could state the 42 confessions and your heart still remains lighter than that feather, then you could successfully transition into the afterlife. So for my people who have the Catholic background, think about purgatory, right? You're sitting in purgatory and you have to say these 42 confessions before you can successfully transition into heaven or hell, right? Now, another thing, in biblical translation, right, they oftentimes look at it as a literal translation, right? When you talk about hell, that's a place that you go. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? If you go to heaven, that's a destination that you go, right? They even have a description of what heaven is. Streets are paved with gold, the golden gate, right? They have a physical description of a place. Now, when the Kemetics talk about the afterlife, when they talk about heaven or hell, right? They're talking about, in a sense, states of mind. So if someone who is addicted to drugs, right, they're going to be put in circumstances that's going to be like a hell for them, right? Their state of mind, they're in a hellish state of mind. So if you're living outside of these 42 confessions of Ma'at, if you're living outside of the Kemetic moral code, then you're going to experience hells in your life because your state of mind is out of practice with the way that they say we should live our lives, right? But if you are in line with the 42 confessions and the moral code of Ma'at, then you'll be in a state of heaven, right? So that's another distinction that we have between the Ma'atic interpretation of theology and the Christian or Western Catholic interpretations of theology, right? The literal sense interpretations and your Catholic and Christian religions, then there's like the metaphysical or the symbolic sense in the terms of the Comedics, right? So that's the practice, and that's how Ma'at is played out in a practical sense. You have to state these 42 confessions, and if your heart is lighter than that feather, then you're able to move forward. Now, a lot of you mentioned this sounds like the 10 Commandments, right? So I'm gonna type this name in the chat. If you guys have time, search this brother up. So his name is Ashwa Kwesi. He has a lot of YouTube footage, and he will support and back what I'm going to tell you. But before I say that, I'm going to say this. If you're a good scholar, if you're a staunch and critical intellectual, you will not believe everything that I tell you. You're going to cross-reference what I say to make sure that I'm not selling you bullshit, right? Because as y'all know, in your K through 12 system, you've been fed bullshit for 12 years, right? So if you are attentive to that, it shouldn't be beyond reason to be critical of your professors, right? Because at your elementary, high school, junior high school teachers could lie to you. Why wouldn't your college professors lie to you, right? I'm no different. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm gonna tell you as real as it is, but you need to be critical and you should check some of my references. If something don't feel right, I don't know, professor, that shit sound kind of crazy. Let me know, we can discuss it, we can iron it out. That's being a good scholar, right? That's what scholarship's about. So one, I provided you a source to to support my claim. Now, when you talk about the 10 Commandments, when you talk about Catholicism, when you talk about Christianity, really those are spiritual sciences that all stem from the Kemetic spiritual science. So quite literally, how we even come up with the Bible, how we even come up with the Catholic text, is European scholars going into the tombs of Kemet, going into trying to read and interpret the hieroglyphics or the Neter Neru. Through their interpretation, they wrote the Bible. Through their interpretation, they wrote the text for the Catholicism, right? So quite literally, this is the false or limited interpretation of what is seen on the walls of on the hieroglyphics, and the walls of the tombs, on the walls of the coffins. Their limited interpretation of what's written there, and then they put it into text and call that the Bible, right? And again, if you don't believe me, do some research of Ashwa Kwesi. He lays out very comprehensive evidence of that reality. In our lecture last week, we mentioned Akhenaten and his ability to turn Kemet from a polytheistic society, right? So they believed in more than one God, to a monotheistic society. So there was only one God, right? So think about Islam. Is Islam a polytheistic or monotheistic religion? Are there multiple gods in this religious practice of Islam?
No.
So it's a monotheistic religion, right? Christianity, is that a monotheistic or polytheistic religion?
Monotheistic.
Monotheistic. Catholicism. So all of our major religions are monotheistic religions, right? So that all falls under the umbrella of what Akhenaten shifted the society to, right? So that's another way of thinking about the claim that I just made, right? So even from a standpoint of history, we know that Akhenaten predates the foundation of Christianity and Catholicism, right? So from a historical standpoint, you see how this is an older science than what modern Christianity and modern Catholicism is. So those are some of the things that to think about as you're looking at the relation between what you're reading and what we understand as modern religion today. Okay. Other thoughts, comments, concerns. What do you guys feel about the book? What do you feel about his argumentation style? Do you think the way that he went about trying to get you to understand what he's saying was effective? Not a rhetorical question. What do you guys think?
I thought it.
Oh, you can go.
Go. You're good.
Oh, I had a question actually. I read in the readings that Ma is not a very specific and allows for and encourages a wide range of thoughts and interpretations. And during that, it kept talking about how it was interrelated as an order of rightness. And I wanted to know, like, since it was like interpreted in many different ways, what were some of the things that didn't connect as well, I guess you can say. Like the majority of them thought that that Ma was supposed to be like really good and is supposed to have like order and stuff. But there's other people with like different interpretations. I just wanted to know what were some of those.
Could you tell me, Brisa, what page you're at? Because I do know that they mentioned the elasticity of ma'at, right? And essentially, when you think about this notion of elasticity, think about what elastic does. It stretches, right? It can mold and be shaped. So if they apply that characteristic to ma'at, so that can allow for various interpretations, right? One interpretation is that she's a goddess, the goddess ma'at. One interpretation is that she's principles. So commonly, she's known for these 7 principles: truth, justice, harmony, balance, order, reciprocity, and propriety, right? Those are our principles that Ma'at embodies. So that's one interpretation. Her being a goddess is another interpretation. Her being the moral code of Kemet is another interpretation. So I don't know if they're conflicting interpretations, but again, just think about even how I said the way that the Bible was cultivated, right? They're trying to interpret this text that they don't understand. So it's literally like somebody who speaks Russian going into Mexico and trying to read Spanish and make sense of that and make a religion or a science out of that, right? There's going to be things that you're going to lose in translation. There's going to be things that you're going to misinterpret. So we have the Russians coming to Mexico to do that, right? Then we have the Italians coming to Mexico to do that. They're going to have a separate interpretation, right? So as we have all these people coming into these tombs to interpret these texts, they're all developing these separate interpretations. Now, they may not all, they're not all going to align, right? But they may not all necessarily be wrong either. They're just different variations of the way that they interpreted what this entity called Ma'at is. And really, because of that, this is why Kuranga took up the task of writing the book, because he recognizes, man, there is a lot of interpretations of what Ma'at is, right? Let's get a concise, concrete definition of Ma'at, and then let's think about, can we bring the principles of Ma'at into the modern world? Is that applicable, right? So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? What other thoughts you guys had about the reading?
A similarity that we can tie from the reading to today is one of the statements, I think it was in the first section of the reading, was all men are created equal. And that's very similar, I guess, to the Constitution of our nation.
Right. But you're absolutely right. But like, we have to also deal with the reality of what they said in the Constitution, but juxtaposed to the way that they was actually practiced, right? We know at the same time, while he was written, all men are created equal, he had slaves, right? And he was impregnating these slaves, right? So while you are correct, there's a vast difference between the way that they thought about all men being created equal, juxtaposed to the way that the American notion of all men created equal is performed. Douglas, you've been kind of quiet, man. What is your thoughts on the reading?
What I thought about the reading was, it was pretty cool, honestly. It's crazy because it's being Catholic, it's kind of ties in with the Bible type of thing. And yeah, basically everything you guys been talking about is something I would say.
Yeah, I'm gonna just keep it 100 with y'all, man. Like, for my Catholics and my Christians, I'm gonna fuck up your perception of reality a little bit.
It's
Yeah, that's what I'm
okay.
hoping for right now.
Yeah, it's gonna
And
be,
yeah, continue.
yeah, it's just gonna be a lot of that this semester. Yeah, I don't know how else to put it to you, but to put it to you blunt, right? Like that's just what's gonna happen because and not to put a negative spin on those practices, right? So like I grew up in a Christian household, and if I were to ask my parents what attributed to your success, the first thing that they're going to say is their relationship with Jesus Christ, right? So if I were to think about that and think about how my life is able to be what it is a large in part because of the way that they raised me, right? So I can't take a complete disavow as it pertains to those religious practices, but at the same time, being critical, when I was young, I'm like, well, shit. Well, to kind of provide context, a lot of our conversations that stemmed around religion when I was younger was around me smoking weed, and my parents was like, nah, you can't do this and live here, right? So and then it would eventually come into questions around the Bible. And I was like, yo, that doesn't say anything explicitly about smoking weed being a sin. But their retort was always, well, the Bible does say abide by the laws of the land. Okay. Well, if this is true, there was a point in time where the law of the land says to own slaves was a legal practice, right? So if you are operating off of that logic, would you be okay with enslavement? My mom tells me, yeah, because that's the law of the land. At that point, I knew I can't fuck with this Christianity thing, right? That's just not nothing that for my spiritual practice is situated with me, right? So from that point, I was on a discovery of, well, if we were introduced to Christianity as African people and as indigenous people, like let's just call it what it is, if we were introduced to Christianity and if we were introduced to Catholicism by colonialism in the context of the indigenous people, because they colonized this American continent, right? And enslavement in the context of African people, well, what were we praying to? What were we worshiping? What was our spiritual practice prior to those systems of enslavement and colonialization? I came into contact with this, right? So in my search of truth, I found a spiritual origin, right? And as I dug deeper, I found that a lot of the spiritual practices that we practice in the modern times are built off of this original truth. So just as we're unlearning a decolonized version of history, we're also going to be engaging decolonized versions of religion, right? And I don't know if I mentioned this in the past, but if you think about the three vestiges of enslavement for African people or colonization for indigenous people, and when I say indigenous people, that includes people who consider themselves Mexican, people who consider themselves Guatemalan, anybody in this North America, Central America, and South America, right? That is considered an indigenous person because you guys occupied this land prior to Europeans coming over there and claiming it as it's yours, right? So the vestiges of enslavement and the vestiges of colonization for indigenous African people are three things. Your language, right? So before, as an African man, before I spoke English, we had language like Wolof, Akan, Yoruba, Hausa, right? These are all these African languages that we spoke. Enslavement comes into play, and now we all speak English, right? Same thing for the indigenous communities. You had your own indigenous languages, right? Then the Spanish settlers come over and you guys start speaking Spanish, right? Spanish is a colonialized language, just like English is a colonized language. It's no different. So the three vestiges of enslavement, one of them is language, right? The other is your name. So my birth name is Josh Davies. My father's name is last name is Davies. All that means is the person who ran the plantation that my ancestors would form, his last name was Davies, right? And so since my ancestors worked that plantation, we inherit this name Davies, and it gets passed on from generation to generation to generation. In all reality, prior to enslavement, we had a different type of African sounding last name, right? So we have two vestiges of enslavement, our language and our names, right? And the final and probably most important is our religion. So African people prior to enslavement, we prayed to Abu Tala, we prayed to Ogun, we prayed to Shango, right? We had all these spiritual deities that were African in context. We come into contact with the Europeans, we come into contact with the process of enslavement, and now we're playing to blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus, right? So those are the three vestiges of enslavement: your name, your language, and your God, right? So once I come to that realization and that understanding, I've been in the process of trying to throw off those vestiges. Hence, I changed my name to Amiri Manzili, right? An African name. Hence, I've done away with European versions of Christianity, and I practice African spiritual practices. I haven't got the language down yet, but it's something that's a work in progress, right? So that also informs my pedagogy, the way that I go about my teaching. I want to disturb this notion of the vestiges of enslavement. I want to disturb our language, right? I want to disturb even how you understand your name, especially for Black folks. And then also how you understand and how you relate to God, right? To me, it says something to pray to worship someone who does not look like you. Think about how I started off the lecture last week, right? Let us make man in our image and our likeness, right? That's done for a reason. And what is the purpose of changing the image of God to look like someone who oppresses you, right? So now you identify from a visual standpoint your oppressor with the person who you should be worshiping. Think about type of spiritual enslavement that puts you through. So yes, we're going to kind of disrupt these notions of our standard understandings of Christianity, of our standard understandings of Catholicism. Any questions before we jump into the chapter on ontology? I want to spend some time on that. I kind of want to clarify that for you guys. Any questions on the 42 confessions? Any thoughts or questions on that? Anything that stood out? Nothing? Y'all okay? Y'all bored? All right, just quiet. All right. So let's jump into the chapter 5. What does ontology mean? Did anybody look up ontology?
No, not really.
I just looked it up. It says the branch of metaphysics dealing with the nature of being.
Yes. Okay. So let me break that down to you, make it to where you can understand, because that's just a whole bunch of other big ass words that nobody fucking understands, right? So ontology is how you understand who you are, right? So ontology is how Miracle knows who Miracle is. Ontology is how Samantha knows who Samantha is. Some of the things that make up ontology in this country is media, right? You have a specific understanding of Blackness because the media depicts Blackness a certain way. That's part of an ontological understanding of things, right? Your family is part of your ontology, right? So if your parents tell you about how they came to be, they're passing down an ontological legacy to you, right? So you understand. My father-in-law, right? They come from Eritrea. So as they tell stories about their migration from the continent here, that's part of their ontology, right? That's part of the way that my fiance understands who she is involved in that story, right? Does that give you guys a little bit of a better understanding of ontology? Okay. So what would it mean then when it says Ma'atan ontology? Think about it. It's not that difficult of a question. What does Ma'atan ontology mean? If we know what ontology is, what does Ma'atan ontology mean?
It's just where it came from.
Right. It's the origins of Ma'at. So this chapter is going to get into what the origins of Ma'at is. Does everybody have the readings available, like where you can see them? All right. So let me ask you, how he starts off the chapter, right? Who's Kua? Look at the first word in the first page on chapter 5 underneath Ma'atan ontology. C-U-A, Kua. Who is Kua? You guys see what I'm talking about? So we're on page 175, chapter 5. I think it's part 3 in the PDF that I sent out. Under where it says 5.1 introduction, Kua. Who is Kua? Samantha, do you see where I'm at on page 175?
I see it.
So who is Kua? Who do you think Kua is? What do you think is the purpose of them invoking Kua?
I'm not sure, but I can assume that it could be someone who used his own interpretations regarding the confessions.
Yeah, okay. Who else? Somebody else. Give me a thought on who you think Kua could be and what's the importance or the significance of Kua.
Could he be a philosopher of sorts?
Yeah, it's another thinker, it's another intellectual, because what does he say? Kua argues, right? So this is another researcher that he's using to prove his thesis, right? So when I talk about what's the thesis and what's the method, this is it. It lets you know right here in the opening sentence, right? One, let's go back to what I read to you guys, right? It says the essential thrust and purpose of this work is to delineate and critically examine Ma'at, the moral ideal of ancient Egypt, using the Declaration of Innocence. So this is another book, right? In the New Kingdom text, the book of coming forth by day, and other key ethical texts, right? So we know based on that he's going to be using other books to make his argument. So if we were to take that into consideration, we know that Kua is another author, right? The other way that we know that Kua is an author is because what's after Kua? We have a parentheses, a year, comma, 292. That's a page number, right? So now we know that he's pulling from some book written by Kua that was written in 1988, and he's pulling from page number 292, right? So again, this is method. So he's using other intellects to help support his argument. So Kua argues that one of the main tasks of the moral theory is critical attention to moral metaphysics, right? So we know from Kua, the main task of moral theory is critical attention to moral metaphysics. And metaphysics is just the things that go beyond the physical, right? So spiritual elements can be metaphysical because it goes beyond what is physical and what is tangible, right? Comparing this concept to Kant. So now Kant is another philosopher, right? And again, we have the same principle. The year was written in 1959. We know that we're dealing with page 7. So now he's going to go into this idea of metaphysics, right? Metaphysics of morals, which is meant to investigate the ideas and principles of pure will. Now, do you guys notice the parentheses, or sorry, the quotation marks around that passage? So those quotation marks indicate, actually, who knows what the purpose of those question marks are? Again, it's another meditation on method. Those question marks are the words from Kant, right? So that lets you know that he's pulling from another author. And he puts those in quotation marks because he's quoting Kant, okay? Again, another being attentive to method. So where it says metaphysics all the way to pure will, we all know that that's the words of Kant, okay? He suggests a task of investigating the metaphysical presuppositions of moral tradition. He thus defines metaphysics as an inquiry into the underlying conception of a moral tradition in terms of its worldview or visions of the relation between the world of human affairs and the natural order. So that's Kant's definition of metaphysics, right? So I gave you one definition of metaphysics, but if you read further, we see Kant's definition of what metaphysics is. So really, it's a breaking up of these sections, right? It's a breaking up of these sentences, taking time with each sentence and really defining words, right? Taking the time to look up what ontology means. If you read this and you don't know what ontology means, none of this shit will make sense because the core of what he's arguing, you don't understand, right? So typically what I do for your journals, I have you, words that you don't understand, I would have you define them and write them in your journal, and that would be your journal, right? Because another part of being a scholar is researching what you don't know. You can't read for understanding if you don't understand the words, right? So you have to take time with these readings and look up things that you don't know. What that will also do, it will expand your vocabulary. Now you guys could all use the word ontology in a sentence and have some kind of conceptual understanding of what that means, right? And using words like ontology in a sentence makes you sound like a philosopher, right? So that's the purpose of writing these things down. One, so you understand what you're reading for comprehension. Two, to expand your vocabulary and expand your verbal skill set. Let's see. Another, so on page 176, is the next page, the first paragraph, we have a insight into what the thesis of this section is about, right? The passage starts with the essential. So, and I'll read that out. The essential concern here, then, is not with equating ethics and ontology or simply defining qualities of being. So we're not concerned with equating ethics and ontology. We don't care about that. Or defining qualities of being. That's not what the concern is. But rather, so now when we hear that, but rather, now we know he's getting to what his concern is, right? But rather demonstrating the moral significance of these qualities and the ethical thought and practice of the ancient Egyptians or Kemetics, right? So what's the thesis? Demonstrating the moral significance of these qualities and the ethical thoughts and practice of the ancient Kemetics. So this is the thesis, what he's arguing there, right? Do you guys get that? Do you see how you can be attentive to when they're letting you know when the thesis is coming? If he's saying something like the essential concern, then you know he's about to say some important shit. So pay attention to what he's getting at, right? For in the final analysis, the ancient Kemetics' fundamental, even prior ethical concern is not ontological, but experiential and practical, i.e. concerns with defining and living the good life, of being a worthy member of family and community, and of creating and sustaining the just and good, i.e. Ma'atan society and the world, right? So this is what the Kemetic society was about. And this is the thesis that Karenga is arguing in this passage about Ma'at and the Ma'atan ontology, right? Really what they were trying to do was create a way of living that is good, that is harmonious, that is sustainable, right? That is Ma'atin. That's what so even in the meditation, right? I said gratitude and humbleness is the order of your day. Let it be Ma'atic, right? This is what I'm talking about. The good life. This is what the ancient Kemetics were concerned with. So this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna break you guys out into breakout groups for about 5 minutes or so. These are your discussion topics in your breakout groups. Can this concept of Ma'at be brought into today's world? Is it applicable in the society today? I want you guys to discuss this idea of method, right? How they're going about their argument, right? We talked about that a little bit about, in regards to bringing other authors in. Think about Kua, think about Kant, right? So talk about that, have that in your discussion somewhere, right? So first question, can the concept and notion of Ma'at be brought into today's society? 2, however you so choose, but discuss this notion of method as it pertains to the readings. And finally, what was the affect, with an A, not an E, what is the affect of the reading on you? How did the reading make you feel? And also relate that affect to last week's lecture, right? So were there similarities that you found listening to the lecture last week and reading the readings for this week, right? So what emotional responses were produced by both the lecture last week and the reading this week, and can you make connection with those? Does everyone understand the question? All right. I'll put those into the chat as well. I'll give you guys about 5 minutes, okay? Yaneli, are you okay? Yeah,
I
Josh, you
guess
had a question?
Yeah, we forgot, like, I think
Can
there
you,
were 3 questions. The first and this.
yeah, can you give us the questions because we forgot to write them down?
Yeah, they're in the chat. So the first question is, can Ma'at be brought into today's society? Can that be applied to the contemporary? That's question one. Discuss method, like how does the author go about their argumentation? Again, thinking about Kua and thinking about Kant being invoked. And then finally, what was the affect of the reading? So what was your emotional response to either the reading or the lecture? And think about how those responses intersect or how they connect. Can you guys see the chat?
No, when we get in breakouts, the chat is like empty and we can't see anything
Okay.
on whatever was in class before.
All right. But does that kind of clarify the questions for you guys?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and then I'll give you guys like 2 more minutes. I'm sorry?
Can you repeat the first one more time?
Yeah, so do you think the idea of ma'at can be applied in today's society?
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Page 272, Trump on Nelson Mandela. Mandela F the whole country up. Now it's a shithole. F Mandela. He is no leader. And then on page 107, you said, as a rule, Trump expressed low opinions of all black folks. From music to culture and politics, Africa was a hellhole. Nelson Mandela, to use but one example, was an object of contempt for Trump. He talked about how he feels about African Americans and that, not that they were friends with him, but he only liked people who were very famous if they were black people, but he really didn't know any black people or have any black friends. Tell me about Trump as it relates to black people specifically.
Well, let me say that there was also only one black employee in the entire Trump organization. You may remember again, I said that the House Oversight when Mark Meadows paraded her out in order to discredit me and state that Donald Trump is not a racist. I'm not really sure why people don't get it. Donald Trump is a racist. His sister said it. His older sister said it. His niece said it. I'm saying it. Stephanie Winston Wolkoff is saying it.
Carissa, were you able to get in a breakout group?
What?
Were you able to get into a breakout group?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So once we get everybody back, we'll discuss what you guys discussed to round out the day, and that will be it. All right, so everybody should be back. Let's try to get through this very reasonably quickly, right? We don't have too much time left. But group one, somebody kind of mentioned to me or to the rest of the class, what was your guys' response to the 3 questions? So somebody please volunteer. Let's not be shy. Let's kind of bring this up.
That's why you're here. Do something. You're the man.
So Douglas, you volunteering to go?
What I'm?
I'm sorry?
Oh, no. My bad. That was my baby brother.
No worries. So Douglas, man, tell me what your group was talking about.
All right, so our group was talking about how we felt towards the reading. Honestly, we were like really interested into it. Me personally, per se, I didn't feel a certain vibe to it. Like it didn't hit me like the other readings did last week. And what was the other questions?
Do you think that Ma'at could be brought, the concept of Ma'at could be brought into today's world?
The concept of no.
You said no?
I want to say no and yes, because there's people that really won't follow it, so to speak. And yet there will be other people that will follow it.
Okay. Who else? Who's next? Who's in another group that wants to kind of speak on what your group thought? You can volunteer, or I could ask, just call on somebody. It's up to y'all.
I can go. Sorry, you go, Samantha.
Oh, okay. So we were actually talking about if we can use it in today's world, and we agreed that you can, but there will be people who will only pick certain ones to follow, and they will disregard the rest, and how, it can be used among anybody, even regardless of if you have a religion or if you don't have a religion.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. It's really more based on how you live your life. And you're right, regardless of which your religious affiliation is, you could ascribe to these principles. A lot of the religions already ascribe to these principles. Who's next?
Yeah, I also agree with you, Samantha. We also discussed how whether you have a religion or not, these are kind of like the basic morals that I think we can all relate to and we're all brought up on.
I think we should have one more group. Helena, has your group spoken yet?
Yeah, I was in Samantha's group.
Okay. Monserrat? Go ahead.
In my group, we talked about how, like, if the concept could be brought into the world today, and we said that it can, because people are more open, even though people will probably be against it. But I feel like people are more accepting now, and it'll be easier to get the concept across.
Good point. And for our final comment, Mariana, what does your group talk about?
I was in the group with Cecilia, so we were just saying how most of like us in current days could relate to some of those moral beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I think that we would be better off if these things were brought into current times, right? My household is structured around my aunt, right? So when my daughter, who's 6, if she's lying, I respond with, "Yo, is that ma'atic, right? Is lying going to put your heart above or below that feather, right?" So that's how my household is structured. My meditation, as you guys had some insight into, is structured around my aunt, right? When I think about and I reflect back on my behavior, I ask myself, is it true? Am I moving through truth? Am I moving through justice? Am I moving through harmony? Is my life balanced? Is my life in order? Am I living a life of reciprocity and propriety? So that's how I guide my life. But I believe you guys have a very astute observation in the sense that in modern times, in this capitalistic society, concepts like ma'at will be taken and used for benefit, or certain parts that don't fit into this capitalistic society will be disavowed, but what they can fit and they can capitalize off of, they'll take that and use it to their advantage. Which you guys are speaking to is the notion of neoliberalism, right? For the sports fans, today is the first day of the NFL season. You're gonna see neoliberalism at play. You're going to see Black Lives Matter everywhere. You're going to see all these messages about how the NFL is engaging in social justice, right? For those who are watching the NBA, you're already seeing that. So what that is a neoliberal capture of this Black Lives Matter moment, this Black Lives Matter movement, and leagues like the NBA and NFL are turning them into profit motives, right? So this is what you guys are pointing out what would happen to the notion of ma'at if it were to be brought into modern times, and you're absolutely right, right? And I think that's not a reflection of the concept of ma'at, but it's more of a reflection of the society that we're in, right? Just about my critiques of Christianity is really not a critique of Christianity, but it's a critique of the Christians who practice Christianity in a way that it was used to enslave people and oppress people, right? So next week, we will engage West African readings, Malidoma Patrice Somé, the book of Water and the Spirit. It's only the introduction. So we're moving from like East Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, that region, to West Africa, Mali, Senegal, and that region. So be attentive to the readings. This is a lot more of a straightforward read than Karenga's book. Karenga's book's a little bit more philosophical. This is a narrative. So it's just like reading the story of Malidoma Patrice Somé. So this should be a little bit more digestible, but still read it slow. Still look up what you don't know. Be ready to discuss on Thursday of next week. If you have questions, bring those questions to class with you. Also, pay attention to page numbers, right? So like, yeah, there's, I'm giving you a PDF version, but don't say like page 3 of the PDF. Find that page number on the paper, because that way we could all be on the same page. It just kind of makes for a more fruitful conversation. I'm going to hang out. If you guys have any questions about what was discovered or just anything in regards to the semester, use this time to ask any of those questions you guys may have. But other than that, we are good for the day.